Hello and welcome to a short video explaining the importation of slaves clause in the United States Constitution. This one is pretty straightforward, but I'm going to walk you through the language of the primary source, the U.S. Constitution written in 1787, and then we're going to talk about what it really meant in practice. So here is the language of the importation clause. You don't need to remember that it was Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1. What you need to remember is that this is the importation clause. 1787. Okay, here's the original language. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 for each person. Okay. We want to think about key meanings here. Let's work through it word by word. The migration, traveling of humans, bringing humans. Importing means to bring something from another country into your country. Of such persons. We saw this with the fugitive slave clause. Persons held to service. We mean bringing in slaves. They didn't use the word slaves, but they meant slaves. These were the people who were being imported. Imported people are people being forced to migrate. Those are enslaved people. So we would say bringing in slaves as any of the states, any states, meaning slave states, because they are the states that want to bring in slaves, meaning the importation of slaves as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit. Why do they think it's proper to admit or let in? Let in, very sweet. To bring in and import human beings, it's because they are slave states that are employing the institution of slavery. So basically they're saying if any state that thinks it's a good idea, meaning any of the slave states want to bring in a slave, this importation, this bringing in will not be stopped. We won't stop you. Congress won't stop you. Before the year 1808, 1808 is how they used to say 1808. We still say this in Portuguese, 1808. They used to speak that way in English. 1808 is the year 1808. So it's saying that it will not be prohibited. It won't be stopped by Congress before the year 1808. In the year 1808, we can stop it. But a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, like it's cell phones or computers. We're talking about people, not exceeding $10 for each person. So they said, we're going to charge you a tax or a duty. So if you've ever traveled through an international airport, you'll have noticed a store called duty free. That means it does not have importation tax. For example, in the country of Brazil, where I live, the government of Brazil charges an importation tax on any items that are made in another country and brought into Brazil to be sold. So, for example, if you buy an iPhone, it is 100% more expensive, twice the price, because there is a duty or a tax. So for those of you who have experience in countries like that, just giving you a little context there. So let's put it all together. The bringing in of slaves as any states, slave states, that think it's a good idea because they are slave states, will not be stopped by Congress before the year 1808, but a tax, we will tax you $10 per slave brought in. Okay? So let's think about summarizing this in my own words. Here's what I've written. You can keep importing enslaved people from Africa until 1808, but we are going to tax you $10 per enslaved African brought in. Oh, there's a T missing. Sorry, brought in. So this is saying that effectively in the year 1808, the slave trade, the importation of slaves is done. Will be considered illegal, and this was passed by Congress, that it became illegal to bring in Africans into the United States to be sold into slavery. It was over. That did not end slavery because there were, I don't know the exact number in 1808. My guess is it was over 1 million enslaved people already living in the United States. And as we know, human beings have children, whether it's by their choice or not. And we know from Nightjohn and other texts we've studied that some enslaved people had children because of marriages and relationships, and some enslaved people had children because of rape, and some enslaved people were treated as breeders, as we heard about in Night John, and forced to have children because remember, slave children represented a monetary value for the enslavers. They could either be put to work or sold for a profit. Okay? So this is the importation of slaves clause that effectively ended the Middle Passage, the bringing of Africans across the Atlantic Ocean. It did not end slavery. It ended bringing in African slaves from Africa. It kept slavery going in the United States still. Okay. Hope that was helpful. Some questions for thinking. What do you think the impact of this constitutional clause was, and then the banning of the importation of slaves was in 1808? So they ended the ability to bring slaves from Africa. What happened, do you think, to the slaves living in the United States? How did they view women who could give birth to children who were enslaved? How might they have treated them? How is this clause in the Constitution and the banning of the importation of slaves in 1808 perhaps the reason why Alice and Sarney in the book Night John by Gary Paulson were forced to become breeders? Think about that. In some ways, this clause in the Constitution had effects that maybe the framers of the Constitution didn't plan on. Think about the effects on the lived lives of enslaved people. How would that play out in the lives of people, in the lives of children, in the lives of women, in the lives of men? Okay, thanks.